Each table will have a host, and your table host will lead some of the discussion at your table. Thank you guys for being willing to do it, you table hosts out there. And if you don't have a table host and you're thinking, who should do that? You just got that part. Well done. But thank you for being willing to do that. Throughout this evening, be sure to fill out the cards and questions on parenting and parenting advice and tips that we can hopefully address at the end if time allows. So as you're going, you're thinking, maybe some discussion comes up about how do you handle this, or how do you approach this, or am I crazy because I'm doing this? Write those down, and at the end, we'll talk about each of those things at the end of this evening. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for this opportunity we have to learn and grow together. I'm going to pray for our time, and then we will begin. Okay? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this evening and this chance that we have to be together. We love you and we trust in you. And even in our parenting and encouraging parents around us, and even our children that might be grown now, and how do we influence them and how do we speak into their lives, those responsibilities that you placed on our shoulders, Lord, we trust you in it, and we want to follow you. Help us tonight to be able to learn some godly information, some godly encouragement. Help us, God, to engage in discussion that will be encouraging and that will glorify your name. And I pray, Lord, that we leave here encouraged and ready to follow you in obedience. It's in Jesus' name we pray these things. All God's people say together.
So I wanted to mention a couple of things before we get started. Your table host has your round one questions. But I wanted to just address the fact that sometimes we hear parenting and we think a specific season of parenting, maybe parenting of young children, or we think, well, I haven't had children, so I'm not a parent. But I wanted to just expand your definitions for that to include every adult speaks truth into the hearts of children around them. Their own children, other people's children, as a teacher, as a neighbor, as a aunt, uncle, grandparent. It doesn't have to be your child. You are with children, investing in children, and so some of these questions apply to you if you expand that role of parent from just the parent of a small child to an adult who cares and loves about kids and invests in them. You have 5 minutes for each question, and at the end we're going to ask you to share some of the insights from your table. So be thinking about who wants to be the spokesperson for your table. Keep an eye, and if it looks like we have a few more people that won't sit at tables, he'll pull another table over. Looks like we still have it. That's what he thought. there's a mix of ages at almost every table.
Oh, I love that. I try to make that happen in SGen. I'm not always successful, but it does bring a different element for kids. I think all this is great.
I do think if I remember, and if I forget, this section of the bookcase out here, there's a large portion of it is family, and you know what I'm saying. That's where the parenting books are. I mean, there's
So you don't have to necessarily get every room.
yeah. This section is the shelf, or I have stuff that if people don't want.
Same here. I think that's a good idea.
Oh, I think not. I think I changed one sentence on one of them on the page said compliance and security, and one said leader.
Well, that's okay.
Oh wow,
Some tables will get the answer wrong, and some tables will get the answer.
we mixed it up on purpose.
We get a variety.
I'm not good at gestures as I thought. No, we are picking up our kids at 8:00. Yes, you do.
I was wrong. I muted the wrong mics. It was these mics. I think it's good, though, for people that are watching, maybe you could read to them the questions
I was gonna. I had just taken a picture of you to text it.
to do this.
I didn't know if you were up there live streaming.
I am. I'm going to talk to the live stream. All right. I think it's a good thing so they can hear what's going on.
Okay.
I mean, like,
Be careful what we're saying.
yeah. I think it's a good thing. And maybe even, I was thinking for you just to say, to read online, for those who are watching online, read these. And I'll post them too. If I steal this.
Those are those different from the same.
This is the round two.
Okay. I'll just.
I always want to sit on these, but I've seen it fall too many times.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed your short, I'm sure it was felt very short, 15 minutes to be able to have some table discussion on the questions that were before you. So now we're going to move to a space where we're going to bring some of those things that you discussed at your table to the big group discussion. So with our questions, I'll be reading those off, and we won't, not everybody will get to answer for each one at your table, but find someone at your table that can kind of explain some of the takeaways that your table has for each question. So from our first question, we have read Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 9. So I'm assuming you all have done that. How are you, as a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, friend, or neighbor, fulfilling God's commandment to teach the next generation about God? Do we have a table who wants to speak to this first? Is that you, Zach? All right.
I would love to. Do I need to stand up? Should I stand up? Okay. I can't really remember. We kind of talked about, that part that we love God with all our mind, heart. What is it? Mind, heart, soul. I'm butchering it, but kind of to do that as a way to live the example for our children. And then I'm trying to think what else we said here. Yeah, and then just being present in their walk, just being there for the tough questions and trying to do it in an authentic way, not in a living life with them. I think was kind of the gist of what we were getting at. Anything else? Okay.
Yeah, to live life with your kids. All right. Do we have another table who wants to address this question? Volunteered.
Oh, they thought I did. Okay, so we said, oh, we're bringing them to church. We're doing it, right? That's all we have to do. No. I guess that is the first step, though. The other thing we talked about was heart-to-heart conversations with your kids, and devotionals are really important. And then a big one that came up at our table was teaching them to apologize when they've done something wrong to whoever they have. We talked about a think sheet at school and apologizing to the teacher. I talked about a 3-year-old apologizing to the choir teacher for his behavior one Wednesday night. But just teaching them that, if you do mess up, you have to go back and fix your mistake and apologize to the people that it affected. So.
Taking ownership in spaces where they've maybe messed up or done wrong and saying, we can make this better. So moving on to the second question. Children need love, discipline, and guidance at every age. How do you provide that at 5 or 15 or 25? I'm going to sneak over this way for one of these tables to answer. No takers? Who's your speaker here? Didn't pick one? Okay. We won't do that to you, Molly. All right. Are you good to speak, Jason?
We talked a little bit about the changes in consequences. I mean, we've never had a 15-year-old or 25-year-old, so we can't really speak to that. But how we discipline Zoe now as an 8-year-old is different from when she was 4 or 5. We're able to have a conversation with her now, and she's able to understand what she wasn't able to understand at 3 or 4. When I talk about it, and I shared this illustration with the group as well, I'm stealing an idea that I got from a preacher in California. When Zoe's a little older, I will give her a rope as a birthday present, and it's an illustration that says, as you get older, this rope represents your freedom, and the more we can trust you, the more rope you get. But when you violate our trust, we pull back some of that rope, and you lose a little bit of that trust. So just having teachable moments and heart-to-heart conversations, letting life experiences kind of dictate how you handle situations. I'm sure there was more, but I'm forgetting.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump over here to the Samps because I know they have had 5, 15, and 25-year-olds, so they could speak to those age groups as well as grandkids. So, Dale?
Well, we've got two couples at our table that have 5-year-olds, and we didn't get past that. So, and it's different for every age. But I think there's one thing in common with every one of the ages, is you lead by example. It's pretty hard to tell your 5-year-old to go clean their room when yours is a mess, and it's pretty hard to ask them to do something that. I'm sorry, Chrissy. It's just difficult for them to understand, especially at 5. And then when they're 15, they see it and they'll just blow you off in a hurry. And I think as the older they get, it becomes even more important because when they're 15, you have better done your homework way before then because it gets more difficult as they become teenagers to try to steer something that's gone astray. And at 25, that's all you can do is they can just look at you and what you've done with your life and how you live your life. And in all things you teach in those teachable moments too, especially with the younger ones. We kind of talked about that a little bit, that it seems like when you have those moments when it arises, when you can talk about God and that's when it sticks. Sometimes better than when you say, okay, we're going to sit down and have this devotion when they want to be doing something else. But when that moment arises, when it's either discipline or whatever it is, when you've got that moment, take advantage of that. And Sue is very good at that. So,
Thank you. So I'm going to kind of walk over to the other side of the room with our last question in this round. What is the difference between discipline and punishment, guidance and governance? And depending on your card, you either have compliance and maturity or leader versus authoritarian. Any takers? All right, we'll give Ed some more practice with the mic.
Well, we talked a little bit about the difference between discipline and punishment. That I know a lot of people, discipline is what you do all the time. You have to be consistent. And with little children, it doesn't matter whether you're little children or with junior high or high school age, that you and your spouse have to be on the same page. If you and your spouse are in disagreement over discipline, it never works out because the kids are going to play off that. So you have to make sure that you are on the same page. But we also said, I know some people would say you should never punish, but nope, sometimes they need a good spanking. Not at 15 necessarily, but when they're younger. And they may need some punishment. They may need to have something removed that they really enjoy so that they can realize how important it is to you. And it absolutely, we talked about that, it depends completely on the kid, because what's going to work with one is not necessarily going to work with another. We had 4 completely different kids, and they had to each one be treated differently. So, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because that is true. I know with my 3 children, all 3 very different, and directing them, guiding them, disciplining them looks different for all 3 of them. All right, I felt like this table could answer this question well.
Well, we discussed the differences between the governance and the guidance. And the governance is just having hard and fast rules that have to be complied with, where compliance is, the guidance is providing the reasons for it. And so it is the teaching part of that there are rules, but here's why there are rules, or here's the ramifications for those rules. And so it is not just a hard and fast, you'll do it because I told you to, but providing more background. And so that's not necessarily something that's going to be explained at the age of 5, but maybe at the 15 or later on, you're going to have more guidance there. And so, yeah, that's what we described.
Thank you, guys. I really have appreciated the big group discussion, and hopefully after we're done here this evening, you can continue these conversations beyond this room and with one another. I'm going to turn this over to Mary so she can speak to some of these as well.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom with each other. I really appreciate that. Cheryl and I were talking about what should be covered this evening. There are so many things that we would like to say, and obviously there's not enough time for all of that. But there are a few things that are important to me that I wanted to share with you. One, Genesis 1:27 reminds us that we are created in the image of God. A baby in the womb is created in the image of God and is loved by Him. A 2-year-old throwing a tantrum is created in the image of God and is loved by Him. A 10-year-old boy who's starting to smell up the house, still created in the image of God. I'm looking at you. A 15-year-old girl who looks in the mirror and doesn't like what she sees is still created in the image of God. And an 18-year-old who goes off to college and is trying things for the first time because they finally can get to make their own choices is made in the image of God. And I think sometimes we think that that happens as adults. And God created us with everything we need inside of us. And I think when you stop and you think about this little one in front of you as having the image of God, being made in the image of God, and it's less about governing them and more about guiding them to discover who God made them to be and what He has in store for them, that you can relax a little bit and say, I'm just uncovering the rough bits and the excess so that they can see who they were really created to be. I have to confess that some of you might have gotten an M&M that tasted a little bit different because I mixed in some Reese's Pieces in there. And I think sometimes we think all kids are the same, and they're not. You may have picked up something that you thought was an M&M, and it was really a Reese's Pieces. And all of us have children who are a little bit different. The Lewises said they had 4 completely different children. I think my mom and dad had 9 different children. There were times that you think, how in the world did we come from the same family and grow up with the same rules and be so different? Maybe it's something that's even more obvious, like a learning challenge or a physical limitation. They're made in the image of God, and He has a great purpose for them. And we get to help them discover what it is that they have in store for them. And so I want you to just remember that everyone, including children, are made in the image of God. Another thing that I think is important for me to say is, as you're helping your child discover who they are, you kind of have to study them, watch them, talk to them, spend time with them. Not while you're doing your own separate things, but one-on-one interacting with them. I remember that they're talking about punishment. When I was growing up, I tend to be an introvert, and I love reading. My greatest punishment from my mother was to take away my library books, because I had already read everything else in the house, including all the cereal boxes. And so to take away the stack of library books was like agony, because we had to wait all the way till Saturday to go to the library again. Now my sister, she didn't want to read anyway. That was not a punishment. Keep her from going over to a friend's house or a friend coming over to play, that was punishment. Me, more time to read. So I think you really do have to say, what is this child? What do they need? How do they communicate? Maybe one child needs more time, more touch, more words of affirmation, more acts of service. And maybe you have defaulted to how you experience it best, and you haven't really studied that child to say, hey, what are they good at? I remember when Evan Todd was a small boy, and he was in junior worship, and he about drove me crazy. He had his own music in his head, and he drummed on everything. His foot tapped, the book, the table, the chair, the kid next to him. The kid could not stop drumming. And I remember saying to Alan and Marilyn, saying, you know what? Drum lessons. This kid needs drum lessons. And he did. And he loved it. And it was a way for him to say, this is who God has made me to be. He still hears songs in his head. Now he just writes them down and performs them. But when you look at that child, you're not saying, this kid is going to drive me around the bend if he doesn't stop his incessant tapping. You're saying, what is it that makes him tap all the time? What can he hear that I can't hear? Where could that be directed in a positive way? We all do it. But if you're watching those kids and you're saying, who is him? Who is that child? Why is he doing that? What is causing him to act or react that way? How can I connect? That helps us to help them discover who God made them to be. And I love parents who invest in their children, who know their children, who give them opportunities to try things, to experiment, to identify who it is that they are and what it is that they love. In your questions, one of them was saying that children need love, discipline, and guidance. And I loved hearing some of your answers about that, because they do dovetail very well into some of the things that I wanted to share. You know, I touched briefly, there's 5 love languages. There's a couple of books like that, and it talks about how people experience or give love or receive love. And as you're studying your child, it might be a good thing to look that up and say, do they want to just be with me? Or do they need to hear, I think you're fabulous. I'm so glad you're my kid. Or if you do something special for them, is that how they experience love? You may be showing love in a way that you are comfortable with, but they're not receiving it. I remember when I was in college, I had nephews that were really close in age. And as soon as I drove up to the house, they would be standing at the screen door, and they would be jumping up and down, ready to give me hugs and kisses. And I loved that. But unfortunately, they were boys, and they got older. So then I would get there, and they would come and hug me. And as I was leaving, I would holler, I'm leaving, and they would run and hide. So I'd go find them and tackle them and get my hugs and kisses. And then they got to be like upper elementary, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be that aunt that, you know, is like making them hug and kiss you, and they're too big for that, and it's not cool anymore. So one time I was at my sister's, and I said, I'm leaving. Sure enough, they disappear. And so I kissed my sister, and I left. Of course, this was the day before cell phones, so she had to wait for me to drive 2 hours to get home. And I got home, and she called, and she was like, the boys were like, where is Aunt Mary? She didn't give us hugs and kisses. I was like, well, I didn't want to be that creepy aunt who's still forcing hugs and kisses on boys that are too big for it. And she was like, they missed it. I still get hugs and kisses from those nephews. Now, that's not the only way that I show love. I showed up for ball games, even though it was a couple hours away. And I baked things, and I listened to them talk. And I'd sit in quiet rooms as they were grown up and just talk about how to hear God's voice and what to do when life doesn't quite look like you thought. Your kid in your life needs to know that they're loved, however it is that they experience love. Maybe it's words, I love you, to the moon and back. Maybe it's hugs and kisses. Maybe it's showing up at ball games. Maybe it's calling them. Maybe it's saying, hey, I missed you. But they need to know that they're loved, regardless of what they do. They are loved because they are yours, just like we are loved because we are His. They also need discipline. And I was glad that Ed brought that up, because discipline is not punishment. I looked up the definition, and there's a variety of definitions, but this is one that I liked. Discipline is training in a controlled and habitual way. And I thought about the discipline of sports or anything that you want to get good at, you have to practice it over and over and over. This is the hard part that nobody likes to hear. Discipline starts with us. It's not fair to tell a kid that they can't do something that they just saw you do. Discipline starts with us. We have to be people of our word. If we say this is what's going to happen if you do this, then that was what has to happen. Even if you're tired, even if you don't feel good, it has to be consistent. And then as they grow older and they can understand their reasons and have more of that guidance of saying, here's why this is not important, or this is important. But that discipline, kids are going to do what they see, not necessarily what you say. If you say it's important to go to church, then you should be in church. If you say it's important to have private time, quiet time with God, they better see you doing that. In my household growing up, there were 9 of us, and my mother was usually the last person to go to bed at night. And if you woke up early, before the alarm clocks, and went downstairs, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her Bible and her journal and a cup of coffee every morning. That meant a whole lot more to me than her saying, have you had your time with God yet? Because I knew she did. She was tired, and she got up, and she did that first. That's the discipline that I'm talking about. Whether it's health, eating right, whether it's emotionally learning how to deal with conflict or whatever, it starts with us. Discipline starts with us. Guidance was the last thing that I thought was important for kids to have. And it is that time where you move from, you do this because I'm the parent, to saying, here's why we do this. Here's why we do this. Here's why it's important. Here's what happens. It's not just because I'm the parent and I get to say, I told you so. At some point, it has to transition to, this is the principle behind why we are saying this is what you do when you need to do this. So many times we talk about in the business world that, if you're going to teach somebody a new skill, they come in and they watch you and you teach and they take notes. And the next time you talk about why you did things and they do part of it and you critique them, and then they get to do it again on their own and you're close by in case they need you, and then they're on their own. It's the same way with kids. You can't tell them every single thing that they have to do till they're 18, and then all of a sudden the switch gets flicked and they just do it on their own. They have to have time to fail, to make choices, even if you don't like them. Talk through those choices, let them bear the consequences, not fixing everything for them, but letting them learn those skills little by little by little, so that when they are ready to go off on their own, you have equipped them to be adults. I think so many times we forget to look at the end result. What is the adult that I want my child to be? I want them to be a lover of God. I want them to be a person of integrity. I want them to be a hard worker. What steps do I need to take to get them there? Because it's not going to happen automatically when they turn a certain age. So look at your end goal and take the steps. It's hard work. We know that. It's hard work. And like anything, you have to make hard choices. If you're making the hard choice to invest in your child, your time, your energy, your money, you may have to let go of some good things so that you have those resources to pour into your child or into yourself to be the kind of adult that you want to lead your child. The good thing is, the same God who made us and loved us fiercely when we were in the womb and when we were throwing temper tantrums, stinking up the van, and dissatisfied at our image in the mirror and questioning who we are when we go to college, is the same God who loves us now as adults, as molders of children. And so he gives us the strength to do these hard things of guiding, of correcting, of encouraging, of molding, of uncovering, of discovering children in our care. We're going to move on to the second round of questions. Again, you'll have 5 minutes for each of these questions. The first question is, what would the perfect family look like? Is this realistic compared to your experience? And what would you want your family to look like? Did you set your timer? I went long.
Round two.
Yeah, and this is all one.
This is one question, and then this is the second one.
Do you have round threes?
No, just 2 rounds.
Just 2 rounds?
Sorry, I got talking and not paying attention.
have gallon Ziplocs in my office. Are you one of those people who would not eat them since they've been out in the air?
Nothing is food.
Yeah.
I'm fine. But I can also probably stack them like that.
think he likes it too. Your kids love it.
I thought he was in high school.
Both should be on.
It's green, but I bet he's got something up there. I think I'm smart enough to figure out which one it is.
Check, check.
Nope, it's Cheryl's. How can you as parents aid in balance and increase resilience in your family members? How do you develop that in your children so that when they face a hard time, they don't just fall over, they're able to right themselves either through God's truths or skills that you've helped them develop? The expectation that life's going to be perfect. Which one's salty and which one's sweet? I think she's going to talk about it.
All right, go ahead and wrap up that final question there and find who in your group, at your table, is going to be your designated speaker as these questions come around. With our first question, it's kind of a three-part. What would the perfect family look like? Is this realistic compared to your experience? And what would you want your family to look like? So we're going to kick it back here to this table.
We kind of talked. I said, well, that kind of goes with Daniel's sermon on families Sunday. You know, mom, dad, daughter, son, and the dog, the perfect family. We said which was not realistic right now. And we have, I'm going to pick on Tiff and Derek right now because I know them very well, but the rest of my table group doesn't. And so they kind of opened up and shared their experience that they've gone through in the last 2 years in their life. They had 2 children of their own, but when Nicole was in the car wreck, they quickly became a family from 4 to 8, and they instantly gained 4 new, I almost said 4 new students, 4 new children. You can see my background. And so that was anything but realistic or idealistic or perfect. And so their experiences have been somewhat, this was a whole interesting topic for us to discuss at this table. But we discussed that a perfect family, we were all saying that we would all say our families are perfectly imperfect because that's the way God created them, and ours wouldn't have turned out, and we wouldn't have turned out like we all are, and we wouldn't trade our families. So.
Yeah, our families of origin they definitely have an influence on our lives and the person that we become. Would this table like to speak to that same question? Oh. Ditto, on that. Well, I think it's really good to kind of think of that idea. All of us have in mind, in our own minds what our ideal or desired family might be, and then we get to the realistic part of our world, and oh wait, it does look a little bit different than that stock photo or where we thought that we were going to be. But also, we have to remember, if we have that idea of what we want our family to look like, what is God's will for our family? And if we're working towards that as our goal, that gives us a direction in which we're going to move and how we can work with our children and walk alongside of them. But then we also have to remember, oh yeah, we have to leave space for the hard, real life experiences that come our way. And Jesus definitely says, you will have troubles in this world, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And sometimes it's hard to catch that last part of that verse, John 16:33. We get stuck in that first part, we're going to have troubles because, you know, I think many of us have probably been in that situation of, we have a 2-year-old that says, I just pooed, and you have a 5-month-old who just puked, and your 5-year-old's over there on the wall with a marker drawing a very pretty picture. And then someone the babysitter calls and said, oh yeah, I can't watch your kids tonight. And like, what? I needed that break. I needed that date night or whatever it might be to get yourself refreshed. And so it's remembering that we do have those difficult situations. It is going to be hard. And we want to say in those situations, really, Jesus, you've taken the world? I don't understand how I'm feeling right now. It's hard and it's exhausting. And so when we look at our second question and really kind of process the conflicts that come around us, how does your family deal with the conflicts that you're facing? You as parents are stressed, your kids are stressed, there's external stressors that are pushing on your family. So I'd like to hear from some of you how you're dealing with those stressors.
Who's the spokesperson? Somebody take the microphone.
We decided that in most cases we deal with conflict in our homes. I feel like I should sing. With humor and prayer. And Bob says sarcasm.
And and sarcasm.
And I know we haven't heard from this table over here, so how do you all deal with conflict? Or what was the kind of a general consensus at your table?
I just told Malia, I said, we take naps. Naps. And funny YouTube videos. That's where we're at. As a family. As a family.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with taking a time out.
Naps can fix a lot of things.
Yes, they can. So question number 3, there's a big word on there, homeostasis. I'm pretty sure most of you probably figured out how to pronounce it. But I wanted to make sure that you left the study session with something that's maybe somewhat scholarly and educational. So you learned a big word tonight and how to say it. But basically, it's just the process of a family bringing themselves to balance and what that looks like for your family. And through this, you can also find resilience. And kind of the idea of resilience is that we're going to bounce back. So we have these highs and we have these lows. And how do we find that kind of normalcy or baseline that we can all operate and function well within our home? So I think it's good to recognize, too, with resilience, being resilient within your family, those highs and lows, those positives and negatives, it's how are you also teaching and coaching your children in their emotions, how they can label them and how they are able to respond to them and to you through that process. As you as parents in your homes, how are you managing that balance?
So yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, Cheryl, as far as there are going to be times of change and times of adversity, times of stressors. And so we have one of our kids that is what we call a barometer. And so he's I shouldn't say he because that kind of narrows it down a little bit. But that child is our instant reaction to whatever is taking place. And so if it's not the way that child thinks that it should be, there's an instant reaction to that. So that's what we call him, the barometer, call that child the barometer. But recognizing, though, that in the changes and whether it's moving or whether there are other times of adversity, that is good for the kids to have life that is not always predictable, so that they can be stretched and they can be pushed outside their comfort zone. But then through communication with them on what is taking place, and then also Susie pointed out that in going back and reviewing different things in our lives when our kids get older, they knew what was taking place, and even the things that were very much a negative, pointing out how God worked in that and what the end result was, and showing that, okay, you remember that, and it might not be a great memory or a fond memory, but here's what happened as a result of that, and here's how God worked in that situation, and here's the end result, where as kids, you don't always put those things together. And so it is good for the kids to be stretched and to be required to do things that are outside of their comfort zone so that they recognize that not all of life is predictable. But it's also recognizing there are seasons of life, and not everything is going to be in a permanent status of a permanent status of everything's always okay. That there are times where things are going to be out of whack for a while, but then there are times where things will be calmer, and you can return back to that homeostasis.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who would like to speak to how your family, as you're parenting, you do that? Thanks, Ed.
I think when you look at that Deuteronomy 6 passage, when you say Deuteronomy 6:6, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be. All of those things show them that they're with you all of the time. And if you're not spending tons of time with your children and you're doing those things, those ordinary life activities, if they're not coming to run the concession stand with you, or if they're not mowing the grass or working in the yard with you, or if they're not, whatever it is that you're doing, that's when they see how you would behave and how you react, and that's what they emulate. So you have to be careful that you do what you're supposed to do. But I think that's how you eventually, kind of find that balance, because you're with them. They need to be with you.
And I think to speak to that, oftentimes when we come back to this is our primary focus, this is our job to love God and love other people, that also kind of helps with our balance too.
Yes, thank you. All right, I think we're done. Ed summed it all up. You did a great job. For me, when Daniel and Mary and I were talking about this evening, I and Mary, we had like this long list of things that we could talk about with parenting, because there are so many pieces of the puzzle of trying to figure out how to parent each of our children in the way that best suits who they are. And when we're looking at them being made in the image of God, and God's brought us this blessing in this tiny little package, that we're supposed to help grow up into an individual who is seeking God's image for themselves and to love and serve Him and love and serve the people around Him. That seems really heavy. And so as I was kind of looking through the list, and after Mary and I talked today, I was like, I'm scratching through the things I wanted to say because I really wanted to speak from the heart. And when I think of that John 16:33 passage, there are troubles. Parenting is hard. And the part for Gerald and I, my husband, Gerald, by the way, which is not here if you don't know him, we were faced with some very difficult parenting experiences early on. Our kids are 21, 19, and 15, so parenting now for 21 years. And for those of you who had some years with us, know some of the troubles we experienced with our kids early on. And our oldest was born 10 weeks premature. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, and every single day was trouble. For the most part, we would get the call, like, we're not sure if she's going to make it through the day. And so that was difficult. But then remembering the end of that passage, but Jesus has overcome this. This will be okay. And so our faith grew through the experience of our children and what they were going through and how we had to parent them in their moments and their experiences. Our second child thought she was going to do the same thing, but we managed to have her at term. And then when our son was born, he was born with craniostenosis. Basically, he'd had no soft spots in his head, and he had to have a craniectomy at 28 days old. And through each of these experiences, we have really taken God at His word, and our faith has grown tremendously in our early years of parenting, which allowed us also that testimony, that witness to our kids, that being in a family is hard, being human is hard, but God has a purpose for you. He brought you through these difficult situations. He gave us you as a blessing, and we have had to rise to the occasion to be able to parent you the way God has called us to, because without Him, we would not be able to be the parent to you that you need. And so really relying on God through those situations. And some of the really good experiences that I thought I really felt like I wanted to share with you all, and knowing that kids really do spell love T-I-M-E, so just bank that. And when I think about some of the experiences that we have had as a family, our oldest daughter is all about the arts. She loves theater, she loves music, she loves playing. I think she can play every instrument that's out there. God has gifted her in that way. And there were many people as she was going through high school, and even now that she's graduated college with her degree, question her, like, why would you do that? And she has found at this point in time a beautiful way to use those gifts through the church that she's serving in. And she is doing the children's worship arts and absolutely loves it. And she feels alive, and she can feel God working through her and reaching to the children. But the memories that we created for her after every show in high school and every show in college that we were able to go to, and we even drove 8 hours away to go see some of her shows, she would either, if she was home, she would crawl in bed between us at night, and she'd say, thank you for coming. That meant so much to me. Or we would get the phone call on the way home or the text message, thank you for coming. That meant so much to me. We were able to speak her love language to her. Our middle daughter loves sports going through high school. If I went to the event, it wasn't such a bad thing because she appreciated I was there. But many games Dad did with her because of my educational experience, pulls me away from her activities. And so they created this bond that after every game, they stopped at McDonald's, and she got her double cheeseburger meal, and he got his ice cream cone. And if Mom went, that didn't always happen. So they had that special bond and a memory that they created together, and it was their time, and it was important to them. Now for me, and Grant, my son, he's getting ready to turn 16 in January. So he's homeschooled, but this year he decided to take a course at the VOTEC in Moberly. So hopefully we're on the road by 7 in the morning, but sometimes it's 10 after. We have 11 to 15-minute drive, depending on traffic and how quickly we need to drive. And I got to thinking a couple of weeks ago, like at first I'm like, oh, I can't wait till he drives because I don't have to get up and be out of my house at 7 o'clock. I don't have a problem with being up early. 5 a.m. is my normal time. But being out of my house, that's a whole different story. I like my pajamas and my coffee. So I'm like, okay, I can do this for a semester. I can get up out of the house by 7 a.m. and face my day every day. This is going to be okay. But I'm really not looking forward to it. So a few weeks ago, I got to thinking about it. January is going to be here before I know it. I get 30 minutes, roughly, of his undivided attention, and he gets 30 minutes, roughly, of my undivided attention. At the end of January, I'm not going to have that anymore. You know, it's kind of like, wow, my baby is now going to be his own taxi driver. I will kind of be out of that stage in our season of life. And that just kind of settled with me of saying how quickly our children grow up and how limited time you have to do the Deuteronomy 6 passage. How little time you have to do those hard things. You're going to have troubles with parenting. But it's such a short amount of time that you have to really share Jesus with them and really share with them how to do life. And then they're on to adulthood, and you're like, wow, did I create the memories? Did I create the experiences with them that they needed, that we needed as a family? But then also, when you think about this concept of you're blessed with this beautiful child that God's given you, created in His image, knit together so perfectly. Heavy responsibility, and you're going to grow them up to be self-sufficient, but also totally rely on God and have that God-fearing space in their life that says, I want to love you and serve you. And those years are short. And so I want to encourage you to really embrace them and do all that you can to spend that amount of time with your kids, studying them, knowing them, encouraging them, loving them all the way, and be the parent God has called you to be in their life and who they need to be able to grow up and love Him and serve Him. So I thank you guys for attending this evening. I think we've had a lot of good discussion for tonight. And I know Daniel's going to come down and give us a few last words before we dismiss. So, Mary?
We also wanted to mention that the church library has a bunch of resources about parenting or families and things like that. And it's the section that's right out this door by this back door. That's the bookcase that holds a lot of those things. And also, if you have questions that you want to leave on those cards on your table, Cheryl said, maybe we could answer those via Facebook or another venue if there were specific things that we didn't get a chance to cover this evening.
Thank you. Would you show your appreciation to Cheryl and Mary for their putting this together? If you want, they talked about those resources. We have a couple books right here that we could give you for you to use. 5 Love Languages of Children. Gary Chapman, the edition for kids, but those will be available and some other things will be available. Those questions, if you leave them, we'll answer them and get some online discussions going, because our goal is that this would create even more discussion in your homes, at church, together as a family. That will continue a discussion for even as we leave this place. If you'd like to get connected with a growth group that will facilitate more parenting connections, contact one of the ministers. We'd love to connect you with a group that can help you with meeting other parents and being involved with them and doing life together side by side. Make sure that after I pray, you don't forget about your children and pick them up if you have kids here. It's Parenting 101. Let's start there. Don't forget your kids. But we love you all. Thank you for the chance that you've given us to speak to you. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll close the evening out. God, thank you so much for family and for this body that we get to be a part of, that we can know that we're not alone, that even in parenting and raising up children and loving them and figuring out this whole thing, that we don't have to do it alone, that we have brothers and sisters around us that can encourage us, tell us their stories, and help us along the way. I pray, God, that we remain committed and focused to glorifying you, that our families won't just become about our own happiness, but about your glory. And so help us in that. Help us in setting rules and boundaries and disciplining and loving and encouraging and studying our kids and helping them see our commitment to you. All of these things that we've discussed tonight, God, I pray that you would help us in it. Give us wisdom. For those parents that are struggling and needing encouragement, I pray that you'll speak very clearly to them right now to know that, number one, they're not alone. And number two, they're not failing. And that as they continue to try and work and serve and lead and help their children, that you are walking right alongside them. So I pray you'll speak words of encouragement to them. Help us to bond together and to encourage one another. Thank you for this wonderful evening. I pray you'll bless this time. And as we leave here, that these conversations will continue so you would help us raise up another generation that loves you and that is committed wholeheartedly to you. We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray these things. Amen. Amen. Please eat up all the snacks at your table before you leave and then go get your kids. We love you all. Have a great night.